colleagues. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar entitled COVID-19 Vaccination and Patients with Cancer. Vaccinate, monitor, educate. My name is Solange Peters. I'm the current president of the European Society for Medical Oncology, and I'm here with you with a wonderful panel of colleagues, experts, and stakeholders, who will all discuss this very, very important topic for all of us. ESMO is very proud today to be the first global organization to be able to build a meeting and conduct a meeting with all of you, addressing the issue on how COVID-19 vaccine should be prioritized and on what will be its potential effect and efficacy in our vulnerable patient community. This meeting will also for the first time focus on public policy issues regarding this COVID-19 vaccine, SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, which is today the main topic of many preoccupations. I will maybe start this webinar in 2 minutes by introducing ESMO to all of you, for the ones who wouldn't know the organization, and then we will immediately dive into the topic. So let's just start with this presentation. What is ESMO in a nutshell? ESMO is today the leading medical society for medical oncology. It's the leading European professional organization working across Europe, but also now around the world in order to erase boundaries in cancer care and to provide medical oncology education within an integrated approach, a multidisciplinary approach to cancer care. This is how ESMO is built, because we are built on our members. We have now more than 25,000 members who, as you can see, are living all around the world, with the majority of them, of course, being in Europe, but it's only 54%, with 25% of them being in Asia Pacific, and the other members being spread over North America, South America, and Africa, which represents altogether more than 160 countries today. We have also, and it's quite important to build the education and the exchanges, reciprocity agreements, with 44 national oncology societies globally. The ESMO mission is growing over time and is vast. We will create today also a foundation which is attached to the ESMO. But basically, if I want to summarize, is to improve the quality of care by also advancing oncology and the standards of care, disseminate the best knowledge to all the caregivers in the field of cancer, to educate and train at every step of the career of medical oncologists or cancer caregivers, ensure high standards everywhere, and very importantly, promote equal access to all of this innovation and standard of care. After this short introduction, it's very important, because we are a large number of participants today, to just remind you some rules, some housekeeping rules. Given the high number of attendees, we will ask you to submit your question only via the Q&A function, and we will try to address all of them, or the majority of them, at the very end of this webinar. We have something like half an hour to go through the questions all together. And you have here, for technical issues, the email address where you can send your question. So this is about this introduction I wanted to have. I remember that when I was becoming president, it was in 2019, we were speaking about this priority which was set at the European level to focus a bit more on, or a lot more, on non-communicable disease. And suddenly next year, we had to face this sudden intersection, this unexpected intersection between non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases. Suddenly, COVID met cancer in an extent and as a drama that nobody could have expected. And today, we need to potentially anticipate the next step of the whole story, intersection and crossroad, which is about vaccine, and potentially the societies to start again to be able to conduct what they have to do for cancer patients. So I will immediately start with the introduction, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker today, Marina Garasino. Marina Garasino is an expert in lung cancer and has been providing many efforts and data around the COVID epidemiology. She's currently the chair of thoracic oncology at the National Cancer Institute in Milan. And she is also a very important ESMO officer because she played the role of the chair of the ESMO's National Societies Committee. So thanks for being there, all of you. Thanks, Marina, and welcome.
Thank you, Solange, and I'm really honored to be here today, and I would like to acknowledge all the stakeholders and all the patient societies and the scientific societies joining this meeting in these days just after the holidays. So why we are talking about cancer patients? There are three good reasons. The first is that there is an increased risk of mortality from COVID-19, but we believe that there is an increased risk of mortality also from cancer, and there is an increased risk for hospital outbreaks that potentially can create problems. Starting from the increased risk of mortality from COVID-19, it was fantastic to see how the doctors were able to join forces and to create registries and to provide very important information in few months. These are just three registries: ESMO Co-Care, the CCC19 registry, and there are also some specific disease-centered registries such as TerraVolt. But all of them are suggesting that there is an increased risk of death in patients that have COVID-19. And just to, I can't go through all the literature, but this is a very recent review published 1 week ago. And you can see that in just a few months, we had more than 5,300 papers saying about results of patients with cancer and COVID-19. And if you go through this meta-analysis, you can see that there is a very high risk of mortality ranging from 15% in the overall cancer population to 30% in hospitalized patients. And if you think that in the normal population we have 2-3%, you can understand how much is the problem for this kind of patients. Another important information is from the UKCC project, and you can go through all the comorbidities, and you can see that for cancer there is clearly a higher risk, and the same for hematological malignancies. But in particular, you can see that the highest risk is for patients with a diagnosis before 5 years, and in particular for patients having a diagnosis less than 1 year, that are mainly patients that are now on treatment in our hospitals. Anyway, just to wrap up the mostly reported risk factors, we know that the high risk are among hematological malignancies and thoracic cancer patients. They are in old patients, in patients with a performance status of 2 or lower, that means patients mainly in bed, with advanced stage, with the other comorbidities on active treatments, and as I told you before, with the recent diagnosis of cancer. The other important point is that as doctors treating cancer, we are afraid that COVID-19 can increase also the risk of mortality from cancer. And the reason is that, as also WHO reported in the beginning of the pandemic, there is a disruption of non-communicable disease services, and among them also cancer services. There is a delay of treatments because we try to delay the treatments to delay the presence of the patients in the hospital, and this was true in particular in the beginning of the pandemic. But there is also a delay of the treatments because patients get the COVID-19, and if the patients get the COVID-19, they have to stop the oncological treatments. And there is also a body of evidence suggesting that the cancer patients have a lower clearance of the virus compared to the normal population. And this is true because we see patients with a long positivity of the swabs during our clinic, and they come back to the treatment very easily. And the last point is that sometimes we have to delay the treatments because there are parents, relatives with COVID-19 and patients are on quarantine. So the other final point is that clearly patients in the hospital can increase also hospital outbreaks. And this is because patients in particular, when they are on active treatment, they have multiple accesses, multiple visits to the hospitals. I believe at least one per month, if not daily. And they potentially can be infected in the hospital, and they can infect other patients, and they can infect also the doctors. And the other point is that there is also impossibility to have carriers around, and this is true for inpatients and also for outpatients. So there are some considerations on the new two vaccines with the mRNA technology. We are aware that there are scanty data on these two vaccines, but on the other side, there are many data on vaccination in general. And we know that we exclude patients with live attenuated vaccines and the replication component vector vaccines. We are aware that there is a reduced protective effect with B-depleting agents, in particular with anti-CD19 and anti-CD20 and anti-CD19 CAR T cells. And there is also a reduced effect in patients with immune suppression. And we believe that in general, cancer patients are with immune suppression. We believe that with the new technology based on RNA, which is not live, we could have a similar safety profile to healthy people. However, we suggest to collect the data to improve knowledge for the next part of this pandemic. For these reasons, ESMO came out with the statements for vaccination against the COVID-19 in patients with cancer, and you can find it on our website. And also other societies at the national level, but also in the international level. These are two very important other global society, the AACR and ASCO, came out with the same or very similar recommendations. And to conclude, I think that after 1 year of the pandemic, there is a drama within the COVID-19 because the patients with cancer are alone, and there is the loneliness of living cancer during the pandemic. And I can tell you that as a doctor and as a person is very sad. Having said that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope to create some awareness on the problem. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marina, and thanks also for this very moving conclusion. I think it's a very important point for everybody who takes care of cancer patients. Now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Joachim Hombach. Dr. Hombach is the Senior Health Advisor and Executive Secretary of WHO's Principal Advisory Body on Immunization, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunizations called SAGE. So welcome to discuss with us the WHO perspective on COVID-19 and vaccination.
Thanks very much. Thanks for this kind invitation. It's my first touch point with the European Society on Medical Oncology, but I think it's really important to have these contacts and to get perspectives from really important professional organizations. So I will bring you really back to a more global perspective in terms of where we are with vaccines. I try to cover quite a bit in 10 minutes, so it will be very high level. I give you a little bit of an update where we are with vaccination overall. I will briefly speak to a document we have released a little while ago, which is a roadmap to prioritize target population when supply of vaccine is limited, which we also now apply in our recommendation. That's the third point. We actually just brought out this week our first interim recommendations for the use of the Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA vaccine, as it was also, as we say, emergency use listed by the World Health Organization. And then I provide a little bit of an update where we are with the regulatory process and a word on COVAX, which is a global effort in order to make vaccines available to all countries in the world. So moving on, state of vaccination that you see here on the slide, we are in vaccination since about a month, and we have 60 million doses that have been administered. You see on the bottom right, I mean, it's hard to see that the way the vaccine is being administered is obviously very unequal. We have, in particularly, mostly high-income countries that are starting with the vaccination, and a few upper middle-income countries. So I always have to look to my other screen because that's where the camera is on one side and the screen is on the other side. So, okay, you see it here slightly better. You see that obviously most vaccinations have been done in the United States, followed by China and Israel having really already achieved the highest coverage. And some countries like the United Arab Emirates started early, also with different vaccines. You see, it's not just the mRNA vaccine, and then come countries out of the European Union. Just maybe to highlight, so we have here vaccines which are called Sinopharm, Sinovac. These are obviously Chinese vaccines. These are inactivated vaccines that have been registered under emergency use in a number of countries. And then we all have heard about the Russian vaccine that is used in Russia, but may also receive regulatory authorization in other countries in due course. The next slide shows you again somewhat of the disparities we have, that basically most countries that currently are having campaigns are in high income settings and in upper middle income settings, and unfortunately none in the lower middle or low income settings. There is a lot of hope for, and I will come to this in the end, in relation to a couple of other vaccines that are in the pipeline or are approaching or just getting onto the market, vectored vaccines in particular, that are easier from the handling perspective and are also higher in terms of supply volume than the vaccines that we have so far. Let me come to a point which probably is of great interest to the group here, which is really the prioritization of populations. As I said, we have issued a paper a little while ago. You find here the hyperlink. And what we have basically done is really developed contextualized and targeted, we have defined contextualized and targeted public health strategies, basically in a 3x3 table, as you see it here, in relation to the amount of vaccine available, very limited supply, moderately, or limited supply, or moderately limited supply, and then also looking at different transmission settings. I mean, unfortunately, most European countries are today in community transmission, but we have countries that have much more restricted transmission, or even countries that have no cases, but have obviously a very significant risk of importation. And I cannot go through this document, which is a pretty elaborate document. And by the way, a number of countries have gone through this exercise, to some extent following our model. Countries had already done it before. And the prioritization concept in most countries is actually looking quite similar. And I show you just a glimpse in relation to the prioritization for community transmission. And so if you have community transmission, the initial focus when you have little vaccine is really on direct reduction of morbidity and mortality and on the maintenance of the most critical health services. And we also have this element, what we call reciprocity, which means you protect those that have a particular service to the society, which mostly are health workers. Reduction of transmission is something you cannot achieve with little vaccine. And that's something that would be for later. And by the way, we have no data whether the vaccines have the capacity to reduce transmission. We hope to have this in the near future. So what you see on the right, on the left-hand side, stage 1 is really our prioritization is for health workers that are at very high or high risk of acquiring or transmitting the infection or the disease. And there's also definitions around this, how you define these health workers, but I'm not going into this. And as next comes actually the older adults in a kind of age-based approach, normally starting from the top. And then in the second stage, again, you may continue with older adults, and then you have individuals with comorbidities or health states that put them at particular risk. To some extent, cancer patients would fall into this category. That is the way, so to say, the global listing has been made. We have, Dr. Garacino has shown the risks, has shown that cancer patients have. We have looked at this data as well at the adjusted hazard ratios. They are indefinitely increased. There's no doubt. It's also important to note, as it was just said, that it is not just about the mortality and morbidity reduction, is also about being able to maintain the hospital process, avoiding nosocomial transmissions and so forth. Let me move on to the really, so to say, hot from the press, our interim recommendations. Interim because we are sure that we will need to do updates as more data become available. And they have just been actually put on the web today. And obviously, I just provide you high-level recommendations. And so what you see on the slide is probably pretty much known to everybody, very high efficacy across different ages, across also different comorbidities. There were a number of comorbidities included in the trials, however, no cancer patients. We have no data on the impact on transmission, which is really important. There's a recommendation beyond 16 years of age. There's no upper age limit. And there's a lot of discussion has been recently on the schedule. And we stick to the recommended schedule, but provide flexibility up to 42 days. We are not going beyond, and I can discuss this further if this is needed. And there's also no data that would suggest that you can actually make interchange vaccines, that you could provide the second dose with another product as they come in. What is quite important is that, as it was already alluded to, it's a non-live vaccine, it's an mRNA vaccine, it's also not entering the nucleus, while we have animal toxicology studies, but we need to acknowledge that we have nevertheless little data. We have no data in relation to pregnancy, which is an important point. But we are not recommending it for the time being, but think it is something that on a case-by-case, if the person is high risk, could be considered. Breastfeeding should not be a problem. And then we have a specific consideration for vaccination for people living with HIV and also for immunosuppressed, where for the immunosuppressed, we have no data, but based on the safety profile, we think that with the necessary counseling, the vaccine can be administered to these populations. Quick overview on the regulatory side. So we have the concept of stringent regulatory authorities that we apply so that WHO issues its global recommendations. The Pfizer vaccine obviously is there. Moderna vaccine has been authorized by some, United States, Canada, European Union. And WHO should be, the emergency use listing should also come in due course. And then obviously the AstraZeneca vaccine is one which received a specific emergency authorization in the UK. And particularly in Europe, we are expecting a decision in the near future. There's a number of other products I'm not going to go through that are with various national regulatory authorities, which on the global scale will have also a very important role to play. COVAX is really an effort to make vaccine available to the world. It is the so-called vaccine pillar of the ACT accelerator, where the European Commission was also a co-founder of this. It's about really making vaccine available to the world, negotiated price, risk management. It's a fairly complicated undertaking. The goal is by the end of this year to deliver 2 billion doses. It is taking up slowly. The problem is, of course, that the current vaccines, the mRNA, are not really scalable and are not very suitable for low and middle income countries, but there is more vaccines in the pipeline. And so we hope we can deliver according to the objectives of this initiative. You see here the timelines and also some of the vaccine candidates that have been contracted with COVAX. Again, the vectored vaccines, AstraZeneca, Novavax is a so-called nanoparticle vaccines. Janssen is also a vectored vaccine, and then Sanofi GSK, which is a subunit vaccine. And so there's still ongoing negotiations in relation to other vaccines. So let me stop here, and happy to contribute to the discussion later on. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Hombach. I'm sure there will be many, many questions about this strategy and the global, I would say, perspective, looking at all of these vaccines and the priority which is given, as well as the strategy to achieve the 2 billion vaccinations in the next 11 months. So it's my pleasure to move to another very important party in this discussion, which is the European Medicines Agency, the EMA. Well, my next speaker is from the EMA, Dr. Julio Delgado, who is a consultant hematologist at the Hospital Clinic of Barcelona, in Spain, and is also an associate professor at the University of Barcelona. He is also currently working at the EMA as a second national expert. So it's quite important to introduce also in this discussion the perspective of the regulator, and welcome to give us the perspective of EMA. And we'll come back to EU afterwards. Sorry for the change, Dr. Delgado.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. So my name is Julio Delgado. I'm a hematologist from Hospital Clinic Barcelona. I'm currently working as a seconded national expert at the EMA, and I'm glad to be able to share my personal view on the development of COVID-19 vaccines. So you all are aware of how drugs are developed, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but I will simply like to highlight the fact that normally each phase is started when the previous phase is stopped. So you will normally start with pharmaceutical quality, and once this is completed, you will go into non-clinical test and then phase 1, etc., etc. So it is usually at the end of the phase 3 trial that the comprehensive package is sent to the EMA, and this is evaluated. This process may take a number of months. Once the drug or the vaccine is granted a marketing authorization, then it is the manufacturers that scale up production, and the vaccine or the drug is available for use. What has happened with COVID-19 vaccines is that the process has been compressed in time. So as you can see here, all the stages of drug development overlapped. The clinical trials were in what were they called seamless clinical trials. So the first one was not ended when the phase 2 started. And again, the evaluation was done in what it was called a rolling review, meaning that all the information was evaluated as it became available. But it is important to say that all stages of drug development were followed as with any other drug. So again, this rolling review that allows the EMA to evaluate data as soon as it becomes available. Several rolling review cycles can be done as data continue to emerge, but it is once all quality, safety, and efficacy data is ready that the company actually applies for marketing authorization for the European Union.
Yeah.
Again, very important to highlight the fact that COVID vaccines have been approved according to the same standards that apply to all medicines in the EU. So the same safety standards, quality standards, efficacy standards have been met by these vaccines. It's just that everything happened in a shorter period of time. Regarding the decision that was made, these 2 vaccines were granted a conditional marketing authorization. This is a tool that was already at the European Medicines Agency. It was not something that was adapted for these vaccines. This has been there for a number of years, and indeed many drugs used to treat cancer have been awarded this conditional marketing authorization. It is intended for medicines that address unmet medical needs and where the benefit of having the drug immediately available outweighs the risks of not waiting for a comprehensive package. This, again, type of authorization is intended for treating, preventing, or diagnosing seriously debilitating or life-threatening diseases, or also for public health emergencies. And I'm sure you'll be you be clear. It will clear to you that COVID-19 is both a life-threatening disease and a public health emergency. So it clearly fit within the conditional marketing authorization. Importantly, when a drug is granted conditional marketing authorization, the company must provide further data after approval, for instance, in long-term safety data and others. The benefit of this conditional marketing authorization is that the drug is actually formally approved across the EU. So all member states benefit from this joint scientific assessment. And again, it keeps all safeguards and controls in place. So again, there'll be a robust monitoring plan to manage safety. The legal framework will be clear. It's the same as for any other drug. Manufacturing controls, of course, full prescribing information, the SMPC, as with like any other drug, with a package leaflet that is approved by the relevant committees. A plan for use of the vaccine in children is also in place as part of the conditional marketing authorization, and the imposition of these additional studies that the company is legally obliged to provide. Regarding manufacturing, simply to highlight that things are a bit different with COVID vaccines. Normally, companies wait for the approval to scale up production. For COVID-19 vaccines, it's been different. So companies have been scaling up during the evaluation process. Regarding safety, the EU has this comprehensive safety monitoring and risk management system known as the EU pharmacovigilance system, but it's important to realize that everybody is involved here, not just the EMA, but also healthcare professionals, of course, patients who can also highlight side effects, regulatory agencies across the EU, national healthcare systems. So it's in everybody's interest to contribute to this pharmacovigilance system. Of course, this safety monitoring after approval is very important. Rarer side effects may emerge with time, so it's important to collect, gather this information for the future. I am aware that ESMO and other societies are championing some of these additional studies that will be performed in Europe and also in other countries. So again, this will be very, very important to have information on safety in the real world. If we talk specifically about patients with cancer, it is important to highlight that patients with cancer requiring active therapy or immunocompromised patients were excluded from the pivotal trials. So there's not a lot of data on how these vaccines performed in immunocompromised patients. We know that in one of the trials, in the Pfizer pivotal trial, around 4% of patients had a prior history of malignancy. And this is obviously available in the e-part that is publicly available. So I have copied here the links in case you want to check that out. So there were some patients who had that prior history of malignancy. Probably none of them were having active treatment at the time of inclusion in the clinical trial. And we know that that has been alluded to already, that patients with cancer may not respond to the vaccine as well as other patients, but it's very important to highlight that no particular safety concerns are anticipated. There is no contraindication for patients with cancer, and that means by definition that the benefit-risk ratio for patients with cancer is positive, and it's important to emphasize this. And since that has been mentioned also, these patients may be at higher risk from COVID-19, well then is something that we need to keep in mind. I'll just conclude saying that same types of studies have been done as for other medicines. It's only that the timelines have been shortened. The expected benefits at the time of initial approval are numerous, but still there's no clear information on whether the vaccine reduces the transmission, and therefore it's important to keep on using face masks, hand hygiene, and physical distance. This is really important, at least at the initial campaign, part of the vaccination campaign. Again, highlight the high regulatory standards for quality, safety, and medicine and efficacy that was met by these vaccines, and finalize by saying that there's a strong EU pharmacovigilance system in place. Safety will not be compromised, but it's a bit for everybody here to help and collect all the information that is possible in order to improve safety and efficacy, of course. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Delgado. We will move ahead with the agenda and go back to the EU perspective later on, for technical reasons. And now we'll move to potentially one of the most important presentations of today, because it's about the view from a patient's perspective. Irene Dingenman is a patient representative from the Dutch Federation of Cancer Patient Organizations, which has a focus on quality of care. And of course, I think as an obvious obligation, since March 2020, Irene Dingenman has been focusing a lot on the impact of COVID-19 on cancer care quality, and on cancer patients. So Irene, it's very important to hear your voice today for all of us being outside of the reality of the daily life of our patients. And thanks a lot for being with us today. The scene is yours.
Thank you, Solange, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share our experience of the Dutch cancer patients at this very important meeting. I'm speaking on behalf of the Dutch Federation of Cancer Patient Organizations, a national federation of 20 cancer patient organizations and a platform for people with rare cancers. One of the activities we do is that we have like 3 to 5 surveys per year. We call it Donate Your Experience surveys amongst cancer patients. And in 2020, we did 2 surveys about the impact of corona on cancer patients. One in March, April, about the early consequences of the corona crisis, and one last fall on cancer care in what we call the 1.5 meter society. Dutch policy is to keep a distance from each other of 1.5 meters. So in the Netherlands, we talk about the 1.5 meter society. From both surveys, I'd like to present a few data to you. So the first survey was in March, April 2020. The first COVID patient presented itself in the Netherlands by the end of February. And so we're talking about the acute phase of the corona crisis in the Netherlands. What we experienced was an acute downscaling of regular care and a very quick response of the Dutch oncology physicians to make cancer care safe for COVID, with all the knowledge that was available at that time. And so we realized the coronavirus and the adherent corona crisis was going to have a big impact on cancer patients. And to have any idea what was going on in the Netherlands, we realized that a survey amongst patients would be the fastest way to collect the first data, to collect the first insight on the actual impact on cancer patients. So we have in the Netherlands, we are pleased with the very good cancer care registrations, but they would need more time to present data. So we quickly realized a survey with two main questions. What was happening in oncology care? We knew that the doctors were changing treatment plans on national level, but were those new plans, were they reaching all hospitals? Were they reaching all cancer patients? We really wanted to know that. And of course, we wanted to know how do cancer patients experience all these changes themselves. I'd like to focus in this talk about one question, the last question of the survey, and that was if people had concerns about getting infected with the coronavirus. A little information on the methods. We developed the questionnaires ourselves, and for example, for these corona questionnaires, we collaborate with oncology physicians. They advise us. The target group are people living with cancer or having had cancer. The way we reach them is by direct mail. We have a panel, we have members of the patient organizations, and we create a lot of exposure on social media. We do it ourselves, the patient organizations, hospitals support us with that. They put messages on their websites, and other cancer organizations in the Netherlands endorse us on social media. We use SurveyMonkey, it's an online questionnaire, and the data collection was during 3 weeks from March 29th till April 18th. And the data analysis is with SPSS. This is the Netherlands, and this left picture is the situation when we started the survey. The corona virus spread first in the south, and by the end of the survey, when we closed it on April 19th, it had spread towards the west and the north. For you to realize these areas here in the west and in the south are the areas with the highest population density in the Netherlands. The characteristics of the respondents, 5,302 questionnaires we could were filled in a way that we could use all the answers. I won't tell too much about all the characteristics, sorry. But mostly women answer the questions. Younger people, more younger people than older people. Half of the people, more or less half, are under treatment, and the other half, more or less, is in follow-up phase. And of course, a lot of breast cancer and a lot of hematological malignancies in our respondents. The question we asked them is, to what extent are you worried that you will get infected with the coronavirus? And this was March, April, the early phase, the acute phase of the crisis. And what we see is that only 10% had no worries at all, and almost half had said, I'm worried, or I'm even very worried. And if we take a closer look on those respondents, we see that people under treatment have more worries than people in follow-up phase. We see that people with incurable disease have felt more worries than people with cured disease. And in the code red region, so where there was a real true corona crisis, there were more worries than in the other regions. And what we read then in the open fields of the survey is that many people said, well, I and my whole family with me live in isolation by the end of February. People were really afraid to get infected with the coronavirus. People said, I have a good chance to survive this cancer, or I have advanced disease, but I'm doing very well on treatment. So I have a good chance to survive for several more years. And when I will get the corona, I won't survive corona. Or people said they won't give me intensive care because we had scarcity on the ICUs. So they said, cancer will give me a chance, but corona won't. And I guess at that time, we all were a little bit surprised about this outcome. Even the oncology physicians, I think at that time we did not realize how big the impact of the fear of corona was on cancer patients. And that has not changed, even with all the science we got later on and the survey we got later on. We still know that people live in isolation, very few social contacts, really afraid to get infected with the coronavirus. And as Marina told us at the beginning of this meeting, we now know that their fears were not in vain. Unfortunately, there is a true reason to be afraid of getting infected with corona if you have cancer. We were very proud that this survey led to an article in the European Journal of Cancer. So the second survey we did last fall, it had another goal primarily, and it was to gather information for the new normal. Yeah, when corona crisis is over, we all hope, but one day people think we will not go back to the old normal, we'll have more digital care, and we wanted to get information on how people experience this new distance care. But we added one question, and that was getting insight on the willingness for COVID vaccination. And I will talk to you about the results of that question here in this presentation. The methods are comparable with the first survey. That's how we work. I just highlighted in yellow the changes. This survey we did not only for cancer patients, but also for oncology physicians, oncology nurses, and nurse practitioners. And the target group for patients was a little bit smaller. We needed to have patients who had an actual appointment, digital or physically, with our hospital since July 1st, because we wanted to get an insight on how we experience the care, how it is right now. So that's a smaller group, and we work together with the Society of Doctors and Nurses, and they received the questionnaire directly from their organizations. The data collection was from October 6th till November 3rd. The response, 2,412 patients with cancer, 180 oncology physicians, and 304 oncology nurses and nurse practitioners. It was a very large questionnaire, but as I said, I'm focusing today only on the last question. Would you like to get vaccinated against COVID-19? And if so, would you like to have priority access? The full question was, would you, because of your cancer diagnosis, want to receive priority vaccination against corona? And the doctors got because of your profession. Then we asked them, would you, because of your profession, want to receive priority vaccination? Cancer patients, the answer they gave is like two-thirds of the respondents in October said, yes, I would like to have a vaccination, and more than half of them with priority. From the doctors, 8 out of 10, almost 8 out of 10 said, yes, I would like to have a vaccination, and half of them with priority. And the nurses and the nurse practitioner, they were still more in doubt in October. Almost half of them didn't know yet whether they wanted to have the vaccine, yes or no. Getting a closer look at the patients, the response of the patients, that is, if we look at the treatment setting, then we see that people who are currently in treatment, also 2/3 say, yes, I would like to have a vaccination, and 2/3 of them with priority. So they feel a lot more urgent than the other people in other treatment settings, as you can imagine. And if we look at the disease setting, then we see that more than 7 out of 10 with people with advanced disease or with a chronic form of cancer said, yes, I would like to have a vaccination, and the majority of them with priority. So there was a lot of urgency felt with those amongst those people to get that vaccine. And important to know is the timing of the survey. As I told you, we did a survey from October 6th till November 3rd, 2020. The first breakthrough on the vaccine, the good news on the Pfizer vaccine, came on November 9th. So that was after our survey. And I don't know if you all recall, before the good news, it was the whole, the prospects of will there be a good vaccine, and when will it be there? It was still a little bit vague. So I think it's important to realize that we did the survey before the good news on the vaccine arrived. And just to make that comparison a little bigger, this is a survey done under the Dutch population, so the Dutch people, and they asked to which extent are you willing to get vaccinated if a good vaccine against corona is available. They asked that in November, December, and January, and we see the willingness to get a vaccine, to get vaccinated, is growing. So as the good news and more specific details on the vaccination is growing, also the willingness is growing. So we might assume that the results we had from our survey in October would be even, the data would be even higher now, we might assume. We don't know, it's a hypothesis, but we assume that if we were to do the same survey now, even more people would say, yes, please, I'd like to get that vaccine. We thought the data on the vaccination were really important also to influence the Dutch debate on vaccination. We have a lot of late evening talk shows in the Netherlands, and well, almost everybody could talk about their doubts on those talk show tables. So we thought we have to bring our results, and because the people will feel a true urgency for vaccinations, like cancer patients, they really want to get that vaccine. So we had the press release on November 4th. We have a national public radio station, news station. We presented our data there, and on the evening on some news programs on TV. I presented the data, and we had a cancer patient, a woman in their early 50s with advanced disease, telling how much she wanted that vaccine because she wanted the last year of her life to be closer to her children, closer to her friends. What happened then is that people started calling the news station, started emailing us, started looking for that woman on social media, on LinkedIn, getting in touch with her employer, offering their vaccine. I talked to a man, 74 years old, had diabetes and heart failure. He says, the way it looks right now, I will have priority access to the vaccine in the Netherlands, but I can wait a little more months. I can wait half a year. That woman cannot wait. I want to give her my vaccine. And he has been calling me a couple of times since then, trying to make a deal. What do we do? How can I make sure that my vaccine goes to those cancer patients? Because I can wait and they can't. So there seems not the urgency felt by cancer patients to have priority access to vaccine in the vaccination program seems to be supported by the Dutch public. So to conclude, COVID-19 has a high impact on cancer patients. There are many concerns for getting infected with the virus. People live in isolation with few very social contacts. The urgency felt for early vaccination is strong, especially amongst cancer patients who are receiving treatment right now and those with incurable disease. And for us, as a patient organization, it led to an appeal we did to the Dutch government several times right now to give cancer patients an explicit priority position in the national vaccination program. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Irene, for this wonderful discussion. I think that speaking of vulnerability, but also this concept of solidarity and collaboration are really amazing and really moving to imagine that there's such a commitment also from people outside to try to help and support cancer patients. I'm sure there will be many questions at the end to try to cover this perspective, which is quite unique and during these difficult times. We will go back now to Miss Martine Ingvorson, who is working for DG Santé as a policy officer on health security and vaccination. She will describe to us the EU strategy for COVID-19 vaccines. So we just switch a bit the agenda, and welcome back, Martine.
Thank you very much for having me today, and I'll be happy to present the EU perspective of the vaccines efforts. Now we heard the WHO perspective, so I'm happy to be here as well to present the EU one. I'll be talking, as was said, about the EU strategy for COVID-19 vaccines. It's actually a document. It's a document that was published as a Commission communication on the 17th of June 2020. And the whole objective is to secure access to safe, of course, and of course efficient vaccines for EU member states as soon as such vaccines become available. The whole thing happens on the basis of something that we call advanced purchase agreements, or APAs. This means that the Commission supports vaccine manufacturers to face the upfront costs that they could have, and in return, member states have the right to purchase vaccines once these become available. And as you surely know already, there are now 2 vaccines available, the one from BioNTech Pfizer and the other one from Moderna. This can happen thanks to a financial instrument called the Emergency Support Instrument, or the ESI. And you can consult the document in the link below. It's a very important document. So I would like to have the next slide, please. Yes, and here you can actually see the current state of play of the strategy, so to speak. There are these APAs with 6 pharmaceutical companies, AstraZeneca, Sanofi GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, BioNTech Pfizer, CureVac, Moderna. And then there are exploratory talks with Novavax. You can also see on this slide how many doses have actually been secured already from the different companies. This does not mean, of course, that these doses have arrived. It means that these doses can arrive. And it's very important to understand that the Commission had the objective of securing a large portfolio of vaccines because in the beginning, nobody could know which of these vaccines would be successful. And this is why we chose to have this very big basket of different vaccines. And now it was actually the BioNTech Pfizer ones and the Moderna ones that came first. So that's the state of play. This is what we have now, and as you know already as well, these vaccines, or the first vaccines from these 2 companies, not really the Moderna yet, but the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine is now being rolled out in member states with the first deliverables, which are scarce and which are in many countries reserved to priority groups. Next slide, please. Normally we say in the Commission, or our Commissioner says, that vaccines do not work per se, but vaccination does. That means, of course, that it's not sufficient to provide access to vaccines. You also need to make sure that vaccination is being done. And this is why the Commission has supported member states to get prepared for the actual rollout of COVID-19 vaccines once available. And we actually started this work with member states before the first vaccines were authorized. This work is based on another document that I would like to present to you. It's a document called Communication on Preparedness for COVID-19 Vaccination Strategies and Vaccine Deployment. And in this document, we presented key elements to be taken into consideration by member states for their national COVID-19 vaccination strategies. And of course, there are a lot of levels in society or in administration to be taken into account when you are going to prepare for this immense task that rollout of so many vaccines is. You need to think about the capacity of vaccination services. You need to think about easy and affordable access for everyone. You need to think about the whole logistical aspect, like for instance, sufficient infrastructure, also in terms of cold chains, because as we see now, many of these vaccines actually do require a very sophisticated cold chain infrastructure. And you, of course, also need to think about how you communicate this to citizens. How do you communicate clearly on the benefits, on the risks, on the importance of COVID-19 vaccines? This is another important document, and I've also cited the link below so that you can consult this later on in case this was not already done. Next slide, please. So, what's maybe most important for this meeting, for today's meeting, is that in the document, the communication that I just spoke about, the Commission we actually urged member states to define priority groups for vaccination. This we did because we knew that deliveries of vaccines would be scarce in the beginning. And therefore, it was very important that countries already at a very early stage actually decided to whom that they would like to give the first vaccines. To be very precise, or to be as precise as possible, I actually just took the list of priority groups as it is presented in our communication, and this is it can be a little bit difficult to reach, I'm afraid. To read, I'm afraid, but I wanted to be as precise as possible. And you have this list here, and you see that it's, for instance, healthcare workers, it's elderly persons, it's vulnerable populations. It could be frontline workers outside the health sector. It could be people living in places where it's difficult to distance physically. And it could also be population groups who are vulnerable in another sense than the medically vulnerable people. We have had a lot of questions about this list, because why is it built up as it is? Why is it as generic as it is? Is it member states deciding on this, or is it the Commission, or how is this being done? And this is, of course, very important for the meeting today, because we speak about cancer patients. It's important for me to say that this is an unranked list, so there's no ranking of the different groups. And it's also important for me to say that it is ultimately up to member states to decide who they want to prioritize. This list is a suggestion or a recommendation. And it's also very generic because, of course, inside these categories, there are a lot of subcategories of people and populations. So this is what I would like to say about these priority groups, at least by now, and I'm happy to discuss further. Next slide, please. So what we did already before Christmas is that we started to follow member states' vaccination strategies, because, as I said, it was and it is important that member states were and are ready for this massive task. It's the first time in Europe that we carry out such massive or mass vaccination, so it's just very important that member states are ready. So what we did is that we made a survey, or we did not do it ourselves. We did it in collaboration with the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, the ECDC, which you know already, I'm sure. And we did this survey among members of the Health Security Committee, which is the Commission hub, so to speak, our contact point with member states concerning health crisis management. And then also the National Immunization Technical Advisory Groups, that's a long expression, normally we say the NITAGs. These are the groups in member states who deal with vaccination from a more technical point of view. But from this survey, we had the state of play actually just before Christmas of member states' vaccination plans. And what the ECDC did was that they provided us with a document, an overview of these plans. And then it's very important again to remember that this is a snapshot. It's a state of play, and actually the document is supposed to be updated, as far as I know, in January. But I would still like to share with you some of the results of this survey, or the outcomes, if you want. Next slide, please. So what we have here is some, let's say, some first outcomes about how member states have decided to build up their vaccination strategies and vaccine deployment plans. What we know now, we know that many member states plan to use existing vaccination services and current reserves of personal protective equipment. That means that they do not plan to build up new vaccination structures. They would like to use vaccination services that they already have. Many plan to stockpile equipment for this effort via national or via EU joint procurement procedures. And that's important, the majority plan to offer COVID-19 vaccination free of charge for citizens. And I would like to highlight again that this was the situation in December. The situation is evolving very quickly, and we can now see how this is actually going in member states. Next slide, please. Yes, the majority of countries also reported that they do have what we call an immunization information system, or another type of registry to register vaccinations, and they are updating it to process COVID-19 vaccination data. What's also very important is that all reporting member states said that they were developing communication plans. And even more important, back then in December, all reporting member states said that they had defined or were in the process of identifying priority groups for COVID-19 vaccination. And actually, many of them, or the majority of these member states, had said that they would like to prioritize older persons, healthcare workers, workers of essential public services other than health, persons with chronic diseases, and social care workers. Next slide, please. So, well, sorry, maybe go back to the other slide, because here we have actually just an addition. Sorry, what I wanted to say is that here we had the state of play in December, and now in January, when countries have started rolling out vaccines, what I would like to say is that they seem to do what we expected them to do according to this survey. They seem to have these priority groups that they actually shared with us in December. Maybe I could add here that it seems that countries prioritize older persons, but in particular persons in senior homes and other facilities like this. But this is the state of play, and I'm sorry that we're a little bit in the limbo for the moment being in the Commission, because we are in between phases, so to speak, because we have countries' vaccination plans, and now we start following the actual rollout of vaccines. And this is something that we will be following. But for the moment being, we have no systematically collected data to provide. So this is something that's in the making, and we will we are going to monitor this from now on. But for the moment being, we do not have data on the actual rollout in vaccines, other than things that you also have from the media. Still, I hope that this has been useful for you, and I'm of course happy to discuss further. Thanks a lot. Yes, and here, of course, this is a slide I put because the Commission is of course massively communicating about our efforts, and here you have the different websites and social media channels where you can follow us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, and then we can discuss later, and we can move to Solange Peters. She is a professor in Lausanne University Hospital, and she is our president. And so before starting the discussion, we will go through the call to action from ESMO. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marina. So it's a quite important part for the community, for many of us to discuss how we can move from there. And as ESMO, we decided that the first initiative we really wanted to build formally was this ESMO request to the member states, a call to action. And I will just introduce you to the content of this call to action that can be found on the ESMO website anytime if you need to go back to the content. The COVID-19 vaccinations and patients with cancer, vaccinate, monitor, educate, is basically, first of all, thinking and looking at the numbers. We have been in January this year counting over time this accumulating number of COVID cases, now ranging up to 87 million cases and almost 2 million of deaths globally. But we have to keep in mind that still on the long run, one of the most important reasons to die remains cancer, with 19.3 million cancer cases, which are described expected globally, with 4.4 million in Europe. And unfortunately, as I was telling in the introduction, there is an intersection, a very critical, I would say, crossroads between this communicable and the non-communicable cancers, which happened in 2020 and continues now. And the potential post-pandemic effects have to be taken into account. The after effects of the pandemic may also, even when we will have solved and vaccinated, they may lead to delayed and accumulated diagnosis of new cancer cases, as well as the occurrence of preventable cases, the ones we could have prevented in normal times, impacting, of course, at the end on the general mortality of cancer in the coming years. And it's also about our duty to know about it, about this potential detrimental effect on everything we can do about cancer. And we also need to measure it over time to be able to evaluate how our system has been impacted. How can this impact on cancer patients be described or be anticipated, hypothesized? So first of all, the impact of COVID-19 on patients with cancer, it was described by Marina. Of course, we have been describing this high risk of developing complication, severe form of COVID-19, and even deaths related to COVID-19 in our cancer patients. But more than that, we have been observing changes in our routine practices, in our daily practices, by pausing, stopping, or even sometimes never starting anti-cancer treatment due to the pandemic, due to the SARS-CoV-2 circumstances. Of course, sometimes it was coming from the population and the patients. The fear of contracting the virus has made some of our patients canceling or postponing their appointments. And of course, we have been forced at some point to halt or limit the regular face-to-face checkups and monitoring of our patients, resulting, of course, in a reduced quality of what we do in cancer. Of course, if you look beyond the cancers which are already diagnosed, the already known cancer patients, we have to imagine an additional impact, which is the lack of regular screening in the prevention part of our profession. And this lack of screening might result in difficulties in patients, or was resulting in difficulties in patients to adhere to the usual, I would say, schedules of screening. And of course, now we will be seeing catching up, unfortunately, these screening processes. And everybody involved in screening knows that it means probably more advanced disease. Of course, additional numbers accumulating as soon as it starts again, and the risk that the benefit of screening will be partially lost by late diagnosis during this time. So both of these phenomenon will accumulate. So in this context, the ESMO's request today to member states, supported by a very large community, oncology community, is as follows. We would like in this context to ask to the member states to promote and consider the following 3 statements. We'd like to promote the vaccination of all cancer patients in line with the WHO principles aiming to reduce deaths and disease burden. Of course, depending on how many vaccines will be available in each of the parts of the world, we need to keep in mind that patients with active disease or receiving anti-cancer treatment are the ones at the highest risk of death. And if any additional layer of prioritization would be needed, they need really to be vaccinated first. We'd like to diligently ask for a collection of data via suitable registries, usable registries, in order to monitor the effects of the vaccines in this vulnerable population. Of course, it is about cancer patients, but it is also about other vulnerable population. And we will need there to monitor the immune response to know if what we are doing is correct for this patient population. And of course, we've been thinking so much about how to convince people to get vaccinated and to feel confident about these messages that we convey. We will need to educate and instill confidence among the general public and among our patients in receiving the vaccines and provide them with up-to-date information in a lay and understandable language. This being said, we are very proud to say that we already have received the endorsement from 25 scientific, patient advocacy, healthcare professional societies and organizations that are listed here. The, I would say, tagline behind this endorsement is as follows: as healthcare professionals and patient advocacy organizations representing cancer patients and their family, our aim is to work together to ensure that WHO's first principle is adhered to reduce deaths and disease burden and protect those who most need protection. So with this, I'd like to show you how it looks like, and you can again download it and potentially circulate it among your members and colleagues, and you will be able to find it on the ESMO website. And with this, I thank you for your kind attention, and I will be happy to answer any question about this call during the question part. Thanks a lot.
I'm Elizabeth de Vries. I'm a medical oncologist in the Netherlands. And we have to share a few things with you. We will take some extra minutes for the discussion because we lost some time, which we regret. So maybe 10 to 15 minutes extra. We will try to make the slides available to you, so don't worry, we will try to share whatever we can. We have a lot of questions, and especially in the last minutes, we got a lot of questions. Major themes in the questions are about safety, about preference for a vaccine, are about prioritization for cancer patients. And I think for now it might make sense. And there are also quite some questions about one administration versus 2, if that would be better to have access for more patients. I think it would be nice probably to start with safety. And questions here are all the vaccines safe that are approved now for cancer patients? How about patients that get immune checkpoint inhibitors? And how about people who are pregnant? I think it might be interesting to first ask Julio Delgado. Would you be willing to answer this first?
Regarding the question on immune checkpoint inhibitors, that one?
Yes, probably. And the pregnancy.
So, and the pregnancy. So, regarding this one, patients, of course, I've said that patients with active cancer treatment were excluded from the trials, so we don't have information on that regard. But there's no formal contraindication for the vaccine for this particular patient population. So I would say, you know, there's no anticipation to have a worse safety profile in this patient population. So there's no formal contraindication. Regarding pregnancy, well, there's a lot of non-clinical data showing that the vaccines do not cause any harm to embryos, etc. But that all comes from non-clinical data. And the trials, pregnant women were excluded from trials, but during the course of the trials, some women got pregnant, and there's very few cases. So again, it's impossible to draw firm conclusions from that. So the recommendation is to discuss with the physician and decide whether the benefit risk is appropriate for that particular pregnant woman. That's a current recommendation.
Elizabeth, may I ask to Irene, how's the safety? Because I've seen in this nice discussion from Irene Dingenman, the change in the general, I would say, acceptance of the vaccine in the Netherlands population. I fear you are usually very open to science in Netherlands. I fear it's not going to be as easy in many countries. How do you think this notion of safety can be conveyed, can be potentially a limitation in the vaccination that we can address to a certain extent by the knowledge we have been accumulating through clinical trials? How would you advise the community, ESMO, EMA, and all the stakeholders to speak about safety? Because sometimes the more you speak, the more you create also suspicion, right? So what do you think about it?
That's a question to me.
Not to Irene, Elizabeth, one of you.
Okay. What I have the feeling in the Netherlands is that the atmosphere is changing. Everybody seems to be eager now in what I hear to get the vaccine. And there is almost competition in how to get the vaccine and which group is more important to be prioritized than other groups. I think things that have been done is like all doctors in internal medicine did a survey, and it turned out that almost anybody wanted to be vaccinated, and that went out to the public. So there are now increasingly signals to people. And I think that will happen most likely in other countries as well. I don't know whether probably WHO has some extra information in that respect.
How to communicate.
Yeah.
You want me to say a few words?
Please.
I think you need to communicate the facts. I think that's very important, and you need to put it in perspective. And I think, I mean, this vaccine has it has been tested in a pretty large trial, and we are now also gathering data from the rollout of the vaccine. And I think this information needs to be clearly communicated. And that's, I think, the best way is actually to really be transparent. About, on the one hand side, the reactogenicity, and then obviously around the rare serious adverse events. And obviously for the Pfizer vaccine, we have the issue of anaphylaxis, where we now have from the rollout in the US an understanding roughly that it's probably in the range of 1 in 100,000 doses, which is probably higher than for other vaccines. We're obviously also looking at another population, so that's also something that we need to keep in mind. So I think being clear and transparent, and also being very clear about the continued effort on the monitoring of the safety of the vaccine, I think is another element which I think is extraordinarily important. That's what I want to say. I mean, we know about surveys that give us much more hesitant perspectives on, the acceptance of the vaccine, and what Elizabeth told us from the Netherlands. But we have to be careful because not all these surveys are necessarily representative. So I think one needs to look quite carefully at those. But I think being upfront and being clear in terms of what is known and what is not known is really what is the most important, and is what is really building confidence in these vaccines. I just wanted to add one little point in relation to pregnancy. Pregnancy is important from the perspective because we have, and we heard it during the various contributions, we have a lot of emphasis in prioritizing the medical personnel, and we have among the medical personnel many women, and many women of childbearing age, and hence the issue of pregnancy is quite important. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, for instance, they have already, since they have started with the campaigns, vaccinated 7,000 pregnant women, you know, with the necessary consent and so forth, and obviously probably women that have been at high risk of exposure through their occupation. I don't have the details. Now, obviously, they are being followed up, that's clear, and there are pregnancy registries and so forth being established. That builds confidence until you, of course, know about, so to say, the pregnancy outcomes. That takes time. The same is true in relation to what Giulio said for the inadvertent vaccination that occurred during the clinical trial, which obviously is information that will not come very, very readily. So again, here, I think it's important to be quite upfront in terms of where we are with our knowledge.
So then this next issue, whether there is a best vaccine, what would you prefer to give to cancer patients? And does EMA or Giulio or Joachim is willing to make a statement in that regard, or are the data at the moment that you can't make a statement?
Well, the EMA cannot recommend one vaccine over the other, really. So.
Anybody else who would like to make a statement? Not at the moment.
Not really. I think we have to say, I mean, that some of the other vaccines that are coming, the vectored vaccines, are non-replicating constructs. So in principle, they should also be of a very high level of safety. Mm-hmm. But I think it's you know, I think one shouldn't speculate. One needs to see the assessment from the regulatory authority. So. Mm-hmm.
And we got one question about the vaccine in Russia, but you may not have enough information, probably any of you, to give some feedback on that. Is that correct?
It's a so-called heterologous prime boost with two different vectors. There have been clinical trial data being published. There has been communication around efficacy data. I don't think we have seen this efficacy data published right now. So to me, it's premature. Okay. It's probably an interesting candidate, but we need to wait until we have really the full data.
A very important next question to me, but it's really something that I don't know if it's already a final discussion. I think two of you have evoked it. Is about the number of doses adapted to the constraints. We have been hearing from the United States and the UK the discussion of potentially, in order to limit the actual spreading of the virus, even potentially the new variants and the number of cases, a strategy adopting a delayed second dose of vaccine might be the way to move, or the way to go, at least in countries where there is a limitation in the facilities as well, the vaccine doses available, in order just to stop, because we are just crossing, you know, this third wave, just to stop early enough this third wave. So what is the position of all of you, right? WHO, what does EMA think, EU, about this potential promotion of non-studied, right, outside the current available data, strategy adopted because of circumstances? Is it something which will be promoted? I heard 42 days, but would it be even more?
I mean, we had a long discussion on this. I can start. I mean, we obviously have looked quite carefully at the decision in the UK around their approach in terms of delaying the second dose from the perspective of maximizing the coverage with the first dose in the population, knowing from the Pfizer vaccine, I mean, they have also discussed it for AstraZeneca, I'm focusing right now on Pfizer, that a single dose confers a level of protection. There has been a bit of a discussion, how do you assess it, but it's probably already a pretty significant level of protection, but we don't know about its duration. But we also know, I don't want to go too much into technicalities, is that the antibody titers that are elicited after the first dose are significantly lower than after the second dose. However, what this specifically means is something that is difficult to interpret. We have leaned ourselves in our recommendation on a more cautionary approach. The clinical trials data give us data up to 42 days, even though, I mean, most vaccinations were within 21 and 28 days. So 42 days is 6 weeks. It's the range that we are kind of thinking is justifiable and gives flexibility in the program. I don't think it responds really to this idea of, so to say, spreading out the vaccine as much as possible. We also have, there's logistic issues with this, because you also need to assure that you then actually get the people again for the administration of the second dose. It is today, I think the way many countries manage today is that basically if people get the first dose, the second dose is essentially set aside. If you have erratic supply, you may end up in a situation where you say, oops, where's the second dose? We don't have it anymore. So it is also from the program, from the logistical side, a significant challenge. And that on balance led us, at least for the time being, to be more on the conservative side. But we understand where countries are coming from. So I don't think we're not saying don't do it, but we are not in a position to really recommend it.
Yeah, and probably this consideration might be even more important for this immunosuppressed or immunodepressed patients, where the certainty of getting a sufficient coverage and immune response after one dose might even be more debatable, right? So probably we should try to be somehow conservative for cancer patients. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. Yes. Probably we should, the few minutes that we have left, we should talk about what a lot of people in the question and answer place wanted to talk about, is prioritization. It's clear that the different people that we heard today see that it's relevant to vaccinate patients with cancer. But what does prioritization mean? So it would be nice if some of you could give some additional information, and then I know that special things have been achieved in Italy with regard to prioritization. So it would be nice if we could also allow Dr. Savio Cineri to give some feedback, or Marina probably.
So I think that maybe Saverio Cinieri is connected. We can give him the voice.
And probably in the meantime, it helps if Joachim Hombach could try to rephrase what he said about prioritization. Some people had some problems in understanding precisely what you meant.
Yeah, so we published what we call the roadmap for prioritization, which and there was actually a preceding document even, which kind of also really tried to set a values and ethical foundation, because there is a lot of ethical issues also in terms of prioritizing vaccines. This roadmap is essentially for the context of the community transmission we are in, is first of all clearly saying that if you have very limited vaccine, you prioritize the vaccine in a way to reduce mortality, severe morbidity, and that you make sure that you maintain the most essential services. And this includes in the beginning, obviously, the health services. You can expand this later on. And in this spirit, our prioritization, so we actually, we have initially, we are actually proposing really a sequential prioritization. our highest priority is indeed health workers that are of high risk and very high risk. So those that are really dealing with COVID patients have a risk for exposure to aerosols and so forth. Now, in the Western world, health workers now may be very well protected. Our recommendation is global. In other parts of the world, that's still not really the case. But I think it is nevertheless a very high priority. And then we really coming from the perspective of, and we had it as I think it was Marina who showed this reference to the to some of the papers on the hazard ratios that we have for the various populations, and the highest is really with all people. I mean, the risks essentially goes up exponentially. And while we need to acknowledge that there's many other groups, including the cancer patient, including people with other morbidities that have a significantly increased risk, the risks that the hazard ratio in all people are significantly higher. And so this is the reason why we have prioritized them on the top. And then comes the groups that we are talking of. People with mobilities, and which obviously includes also the cancer patients. Now, I think Marina pointed out very importantly in her presentation that there's other elements that also need to be considered. The element that, so to say, the cancer treatment may actually suffer. The element that you actually may promote nosocomial infection and make things very difficult in the management of the hospital. So I think all these things need to be considered, and therefore I think your plea and your advocacy in making people aware of this specific concern is absolutely valid.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And these aspects could also, of course, be taken into account in the decisions within the member states, for example, in the EU. Marina, are you or a colleague of you able to tell about what the medical oncologist in Italy did?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Good.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth, Solange, and Marina, and all ESMO to invite IOM and me to this Scale in Action. IOM, Associazione Italiana Oncologia Medica, has set up a foundation called FOCE, together with cardiologists and hematologists, to pursue the demands of oncological, hematological, and cardiologist patients, also regarding the vaccination of COVID. The foundation was received by the First Minister of the Italian government, by the Minister of the Health, and it was endorsed by the National Technical Scientific COVID Commission, CTS. We have requested, and above all obtained, that cancer patients undergoing active treatment be vaccinated in the second phase, presumably March, April, while follow-up patients will be vaccinated according to their age group. IOM provide CTX after specific request, so the estimated number of patients to be vaccinated. There is a second point that I would like to bring to the attention of their colleagues. In the first days of January 21, IOM published and sent to the members a document relating the vaccination against COVID, which tries to give indications to medical oncologists regarding the management and timing relative. The document, in addition to be sent to all IOM members, is present on the IOM webpage. I also remember that since 2014, IOM has published the recommendation relating the seasonal influenza vaccination in Annals of Oncology. In anticipation of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic phase, IOM has consolidated these recommendations by publishing an update of the same and holding a press conference on this topic during the National Online Congress. This is the action of the Italian Oncology Society. Thanks for the attention.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for presenting that, because it's really very interesting to see that country after country, there will be the adoption of local guidelines, also fitting the environment, right? The capabilities, the facilities, the number of doses, but it will be very interesting, and I'm sure we can do it also in ESMO to try to group or to at least summarize what has been put in place according to the landscape of every caregiver, right? Because it might be very interesting to compare and to propose solutions. In the ESMO call to action, there was one statement about priority to be given to cancer patients. And there was an additional layer, which is based really on the data produced by and presented by Marina and colleagues, that if really there is a limitation or a priority to be given among cancer patients, like it was told before, the patients who first of all are forced to go up and forth to the hospital, but also who have been shown to be more susceptible to COVID infection complication, but also mortality, meaning the ones with active disease, meaning not in remission, or the ones with active cancer treatments ongoing, should be the one who must first receive the letter to come and present themselves for the vaccine. And this is potentially more about creating facilities and getting the patients entering and being vaccinated than really about the doses of vaccine, because the whole management of the flux of patients might prioritize first the ones which are really in danger. So this is what we have been, just to explain, because there was one question, what was this kind of understatement in cancer patients prioritizing first active disease and active treatments?
Right, and at the same time, we still have work to do, because we don't know whether all patients that we do vaccinate are thereafter really protected, whether they are as well able to get an immune response. So it's really good that studies will be ongoing. I heard about Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, so I hope we can share these data very soon as well, because that will be very informative. I'm just afraid that we run a bit out of time. Solange, you are, what do you think?
Well, I just wanted before, because Rosa will give us the final word, Rosa Giuliani, in order to really kind of wrap up the next steps. But maybe I would like to give the final maybe remark about all these statements we've been doing to Irene Digenmans, because maybe some patients, we've been discussing a lot about theoretical concepts, right? How can you bring it back, or what else should we do to bring it back to our patients? Are we missing something?
No, well, not yet. In the Netherlands, we were very pleased with the statements of the ESMO put on their website. As soon as we saw them, we put them in a letter and sent them to the government, sent them to the scientific board, advising the government on vaccination, supporting the urgency that the patients feel themselves. We need, as a patient organization, we need the medical support. We need the scientific data. And to get the priority position for cancer patient it's hard, even in the Netherlands, to make it explicit in the government rules. So we need you. I think we need to work all together to get this done in Europe for all cancer patients. And as mentioned also, we really want the vaccination for cancer patients to be monitored, to be registered internationally, so as fast as possible the knowledge will grow about in what way cancer patients are sorry, I'm losing a word, properly safe for coronavirus. So that I hope you all doctors will work together and create the knowledge we need so badly. And I hope you'll speak out, as the ESMO has done, because we need to influence the policies of the governments.
Thanks a lot. Maybe the final word before Rosa, at the EU level, right? At the Commission, are we missing something? How can we support this very important work which will happen among the member states, right? How can health practitioners, can health professionals support this very important political work, right, which will happen? Martin?
Yes, I mean, it's clear that health professionals as such are in important advocates for vaccination. We're working closely with them, also to address the questions and concerns that people could have, also according to their health situation. I would need to say concerning these calls for actions to member states, it's a very sensitive business in a way, because I can share with you maybe that for the moment being, the Commission receives a lot of calls and questions and letters for different groups who would like to be prioritized for vaccination, and this is understandable. But as I explained, and I hope to be very clear on that matter, the recommendations that the Commission has provided are and remain recommendations and or suggestions that member states could consider. They're not very specific, they're not ranked, and it is ultimately up to member states to decide what to do. So I understand the Dutch, the call for to the Netherlands to prioritize cancer patients. We should also, I cannot, of course, but it's very difficult to say this in a correct way. But it's also that there are different groups who also other groups than cancer patients who could of course benefit from priority vaccination, and it's just a very sensitive business that we undertaking here, and this I need to say this.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
From an EU point of view.
It's very important. It's a very important accent that you give us here, right? Not forgetting about vulnerabilities in general, right? And also beyond what we do. So thank you for
what I would actually also like to say is that for the moment being, there is maybe to use a bit of a brutal word, a certain hysteria in the media about will we get sufficient vaccines? Will there be vaccines for everybody? We have known from the start that deliveries would be scarce from the beginning. This is why we asked countries to define priority groups. But the idea is that everybody will have a vaccine. That's the beauty of this. So of course priority groups are important, but it is the idea and it is the goal that everybody will have a vaccine, because this is the only way we can stop this pandemic.
It's just a way to sequence. Yeah, thanks a lot.
It is
very important consideration. So thanks to all of you. Unfortunately, we get a little bit out of time for the inspiring and interesting discussions. To wrap up, as I said before, I would like to give the floor to Rosa Giuliani. Rosa is a consultant medical oncologist at the Clatterbridge Cancer Center in Liverpool, and she's also an ESMO board member, and she is our Director of Public Policy within ESMO. Welcome, Rosa.
Thank you, Solange. I think that, wow, this was a discussion. I'm really amazed by the level of contribution and all the questions that we receive. And I think that, so first of all, I want to reassure everybody that all attendees will receive the link with the ESMO call, which is available on the ESMO website, but apparently it's not so easy to locate. Shame on us. So we will provide that to all attendees. We had so many questions. I think that it would be very useful to reflect more in detail on the type of question that we have. Excellent point, excellent question. Maybe we can promote further the discussion with the elaboration of the main points. Before wrapping up, just 1 minute to thank really all the panelists and the speakers for the quality of the presentation, for the honesty of the presentation, and for having accepted basically to contribute to this meeting while they were having their Christmas lunch, because this was the speed with which the meeting was set up. I want to thank also Malvika Vias from the ESMO staff that has done an enormous amount of work to set up the meeting, Solange Peters and Marina Garassino for conceiving this meeting that, you know, it's a very important time to discuss this topic that is something new in a way for all of us. And also all the society that very quickly answered and endorsed the ESMO call for action discussion. The number is increasing while we are speaking. It is clear that this is the most important mass campaign vaccination that everybody can remember. And of course, there are many problems in terms of capacity of the service, easy access, infrastructure, as we were reminded by the Commission, by Marine in Vorsen. But above all, this is our opportunity to show that collaboration pays. This has been already showed. And in order to succeed, we need to have a clear and shared, aligned plan for action. I just want to remind, I was reflecting this morning on the fact that this time last year, in the early 2020, we were just starting to discuss about this virus, and less than 1 year later, we had few vaccines that have been already approved in December 2020. And this was possible, and this happened because we worked in parallel, because we abated, if you want, the silos that usually separate different groups, different groups. And this was done by necessity. We need to rethink maybe of drug development, even in cases where there is not this huge necessity. It is clear that from Marina we learned that there is an increased risk of mortality for patients with cancers. There is no discussion about it. And this is the first point of our call, of the ESMO call, vaccinate. We need a strategy. From EMA, from Giulio Delgado, we learned that the vaccines are safe. There are no safety concerns anticipated for patients with cancer. And we know at the same time, and I really appreciate the comment that Giulio made about the fact that there are some gray areas, and there is it's up to everybody of us to help to collect data. So collect data and monitor. This is the second point of the call. I've been quite reassured by the presentation of Irene, that actually showed us that there is a progressive increase in willingness to get vaccinated among patients. And this is maybe something due to the communication. So we need to learn more how to better communicate the results that are already in our hand, including the area of uncertainty. We need to raise awareness. And this is the third point of our call. At the same time, as I said at the very beginning, we need a plan, shared action, and we've been shown by Dr. Hombach and by Martin in Vorsen, so WHO and the Commission, that there are recommendations, that there are discussions between WHO, between European institution and member state, and we need to be sure that there is a nice translation of the discussion in practical terms. There are clear recommendations about how to prioritize, if needed, the vaccine campaign. I want to close here because I think that we really run out of time, and just want to remember that this is the first of a series of webinars, of policy webinars that ESMO is organizing in order to discuss topics such as one that actually are related to how we can better deliver cancer care to our patients. So stay tuned, and thank you all once again for your participation.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
All of you.
Bye.
Thanks a
You
lot.
too. Bye.
Bye.